seems like that could be cheese.
With little broccoli things on it?
Does it look like it tastes good? That's all I care about.
Well, until he said broccoli.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm showing you a really fun cookie from What's for Dessert. These are called Lime Squiggles. It is a style of cookie called a meltaway. It's a type of shortbread. They're so festive and fun looking and also incredibly easy. Cookies are not really like my favorite thing to make, but all the cookies in What's for Dessert are so fun to make and come together so easily that it's like, this is actually kind of one of my favorite recipes in the book. No shock there, I guess. When I'm writing a cookbook and I was working on the cookies chapter, I just wanted to introduce like new shapes and forms because like obviously most cookies are round, and piping it felt like a really fun way to do that. And then the squiggle shape is just even more fun. I don't know, I feel like squiggles are kind of like a thing, you know? These cookies are called meltaway, which is a style of shortbread. And shortbread at its simplest is a mixture of butter, flour, and sugar. Now what makes these a little bit different is they have some cornstarch added in place of a bit of flour. So that cornstarch is not producing gluten when it comes into contact with the other ingredients, and so it just makes a very, very tender shortbread. So as long as you have limes around, and also you could use another citrus for this, everything else is kind of a pantry ingredient. I have all-purpose flour, powdered sugar, and I have that in two places because I'm gonna put a glaze on top. Cornstarch, that is a secret ingredient. That is what is going to contribute a lot of tenderness to the cookie, so that's how meltaways get their name. They sort of dissolve in your mouth. Unsalted butter, I'm adding a little bit of cream cheese actually to the dough, a bit of a twist on the recipe. Then I have freshly grated lime zest, fresh squeezed lime juice. I have 2 tablespoons for the dough, 2 tablespoons for the glaze, and a little bit of kosher salt, and that's it. Oh, vanilla extract. Special equipment, I am using a hand mixer. So I have that with the beaters, and then I have a rim baking sheet with parchment paper on it. And then to pipe them, I do have, this is kind of the one piece of specialty equipment, I have an open star tip, a large open star tip. You don't have to use a pastry tip for piping them, but it's gonna make your life a lot easier, and it's just gonna add nice shape and ridges on the cookies and everything like that. You will need a rasp style grater, like a microplane, for your zest, and also for freshly grating some zest on top of the cookies. The cookies are not green, you know, like lime juice isn't really that green. So I like doing lime zest on top so you can see what the flavor is gonna be of the final cookie. One thing I like about this recipe, and a lot of the cookies in general, is that they're like it's like instant gratification. There's no waiting, there's no resting, you just mix, pipe, and bake. This dough comes together really quickly and then it's piped pretty much immediately, so I already have my oven coming up to 350. So I'm gonna start by mixing my dry ingredients. I have all-purpose flour, that cornstarch, a common and very useful substitute for cake flour is actually cutting all-purpose flour with a little bit of cornstarch because, again, it has that kind of like tenderizing effect. Then I'm adding a little bit of kosher salt. So those are the dry ingredients. So I have some unsalted butter. I'm gonna start, Archie, so loud. What's he doing? This is at room temperature. And then I'm cutting it with a little bit of cream cheese. It adds a little bit of tang that I think is nicely highlighted by the lime. Then I'm gonna add my lime zest and my powdered sugar. Adding just a little bit of liquid in the form of lime juice, and I'm gonna add my vanilla extract to the lime juice. So it's just a teaspoon. Whenever you're creaming together any kind of butter and sugar, it's always good if the butter is kind of cool room temperature. You don't want it to be so warm that it's like starting to get shiny. So I'm just stirring this together a little bit so that the powdered sugar incorporates, so that when I turn the mixer on, it doesn't plume everywhere. Because I'm not using granulated sugar, I'm not gonna get something really light and fluffy. You really need granulated sugar to kind of cut into the butter when you're creaming, but I'm not going for a really light and fluffy texture anyway. I just wanna kind of combine everything and get it smooth. I find that cream cheese, when you add it to a dough, is also kind of tenderizing. So I like that addition here a lot. Okay, so I didn't go very long, maybe just about a minute or so of beating on medium-high or so. I'm gonna scrape it on the bowl. It's a tiny bit fluffy, but it's really just very smooth and creamy. I'm now gonna add those 2 tablespoons of lime juice and my vanilla extract. Butter can only kind of take a little bit of liquid before it will separate or break. So just 2 tablespoons of juice. So I'm just gonna mix that in. And there's no egg in this recipe. Again, this is a shortbread. Usually there's no egg in shortbread. So that's all I'm adding. So you can see it's nice and smooth. I like seeing those flecks of lime zest in there. Now I'm gonna add my dry ingredients all in one shot. And now that I've added the dry ingredients, you're just going to mix on low speed until barely incorporated. So you'll have a somewhat firm dough. I'm going to get rid of the mixer and then finish mixing by hand. You see I have some kind of dry spots around the sides. This is a temperature sensitive dough. And if you were working in a cool kitchen, you might find that the dough is sort of stiff and that can make it more difficult to pipe. So if you're having any kind of difficulties, let it warm up. So set it in a warm spot, put it in the sunlight maybe or near like a heater. You definitely don't want it to melt. That butter will melt if it gets too warm and then your dough is sort of kaput. But if you just find that it's too stiff to pipe, that's the reason. You didn't do anything wrong. So I'm just mixing well with a spatula. It's firm but pipeable. It can hold up to a little bit of mixing because there's so much butter, there's very little liquid, and I have that cornstarch added. It's very unlikely that you'll develop lots of gluten. So I'm just making sure it's all totally incorporated. So I have here, this is an 18-inch pastry bag. So I cut an opening in the bag about maybe 1.5 inches wide. So then I put the tip inside the bag. And then I really apply some pressure to sort of force it down into the bag so that it stays in place. I don't have what's called a coupler, which is like a 2-piece little plastic stopper almost that holds the pastry tip in place. So I'm going to fill my pastry bag. Whenever you're piping anything, whether it's cookie dough or frosting or pâte à choux, you want to make sure that there aren't lots of big air pockets in your pastry bag because that will lead to like breaks in the line that you're piping. So if you can, actually try to get your dough in there like all in one piece. So it's firm enough to kind of hold. So I'm actually just going to use my hands to get it into the bag. And now I'm ready to start piping my squiggles. I have my rim baking sheet with parchment paper. Typically, I prefer to use a silicone baking mat, a nonstick baking mat that you can reuse. But for cookies, it's actually better to use parchment because sometimes, especially a buttery cookie, can spread excessively on a baking mat. So parchment is actually better. So I have some parchment here, which I'll just reuse. So I'll see if I can pipe this, but it might just take a little bit of force, or if I'm having a really hard time, I'm just gonna let it warm up a little bit. And as you pipe, the heat from your hands will also actually warm up the dough a little bit. So you might find that the last couple that you pipe go a little bit easier than the first. This is a bench scraper. And this will just help you to work cleanly because it's a good tool for forcing whatever is in the bag down toward the end of the bag. It helps to work clean like that. I mean, it's just made an S. It's kind of cute though. You can definitely play around with shapes. I just wouldn't pipe them in wildly different sizes because then they won't quite bake all at the same rate. And as you work, make sure that you are twisting the bag because that's gonna help you build up some pressure to be able to force the dough out of the bag. I think this is a nice size. It'll be like a 3-bite cookie, more or less. These really don't spread, so you can pipe them pretty close together. Leave a little bit of space because you'll need air circulation for even baking, but don't worry about spreading and running into each other. So I'm just gonna continue to fill my baking sheet with the rest of my dough, and then we'll bake the cookies. No, we're good with 3, right? With 3 squiggles. I know, Archie, I know. Got some warm dough. Everything's gonna work out great. Action. I have my incredibly cute, if I do say so myself, squiggles, all piped. So I got 15. They're not really like evenly spaced on the baking sheet, which isn't a big deal because again, they don't spread, but I'm going to chill them. So I want the dough to firm up. I did let the dough soften and warm up a little bit so that I could pipe it easily. So it's just a little bit soft and I want it to firm up because that will help the cookies to hold their shape in the oven. And once you do that, you can probably actually rearrange them if you need to spread them out a little bit better. So just like 15 minutes or so in the fridge. Guys, I actually sort of have room. Oh my God, I can't believe it. And then we're gonna bake them and then glaze them. And that's really it. My timer just went off. So the bake time for the cookies is 18 to 22 minutes. I set the timer for 18, and based on how they smell, I think they're probably done, so I'm gonna pull them out. The cookies are gonna stay pale. You're just looking for a little bit of golden brown along the ridges where the star tip left its ridges. So there was a little bit of puffing, but again, no spread. They totally held their shape. And you'll see just kind of at the points and along some of the ridges, there's a little bit of golden brown, but they're nice and pale. They look great. So I'm gonna let these cool, and while they're cooling, I'm gonna mix my lime glaze. Also, you can see that I rearranged them once they were chilled. You can pretty much pick up the whole unbaked cookie when it's cold. And I just made sure that they were evenly spaced on the baking sheet. So for the glaze, I like to add a little bit of melted butter to glazes because it helps to thicken it a little bit and give it some nice body. If you have really lumpy confectioner sugar, you might want to sift it. It's usually not necessary. So I'm going to add my lime juice and my melted butter. And it's a good idea to always have a little bit of extra confectioner sugar or lime juice around. If you don't have extra lime juice, you can just use water because you often will need to adjust to the consistency of the glaze. And I'm not going for like a thick glaze here. It is thick enough that it really clings to the cookie, but it leaves kind of like a translucent layer, which I really like. So it's not an overly thick glaze. So this consistency looks good. You can see it is pourable, but it's still fairly thick. So that's the glaze. It doesn't look like very much, but it is enough to coat all of the cookies. So I have my glaze, and then I have my limes here because I'm gonna do a little bit of fresh zest over each cookie after I glaze it, before the glaze sets. You can see that the bottom is nice and golden brown, but the tops are still pale. So nice and golden brown. I'm gonna leave this parchment paper on here and then let these cool. And then when it's time to glaze, I'm gonna set the rack over my lined baking sheet in case there's any drips. This has been sitting out, so I might actually add a squeeze of additional lime juice because it will set up a little bit. If you don't have extra lime, you can just add a dash of water. You are looking for a smooth, pourable consistency, but you still want it to be opaque and thick. So you're gonna take a cookie one at a time, and I'm only gonna glaze the surface, so just not the bottom that's golden brown. I want the cookie to pick up the glaze like in all of those ridges. So I lower it down, I'm kind of grasping it by the edges. I'm gonna lower it upside down into the glaze, let it kind of sink in, but not submerge, and then wiggle it around. And that wiggling is gonna help the cookie to pick up all of that glaze. And then let any excess run off. And you want the consistency of the glaze to be such that you're gonna still see some of those ridges underneath. That's gonna go back onto the rack. And then I'm gonna add, while the glaze is still wet, I'm gonna add a little bit of lime zest. So you definitely know these are lime cookies. Okay, and that's it. Look how pretty. I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of them, get a little bit of zest on top, and then they just need to sit until that glaze is set. I mean, you could still enjoy them now, but I think they're better when the glaze has a chance to kind of harden. So that'll take maybe 15 or 20 minutes. So then we'll come back and taste. Oh my gosh. These are the cutest cookies. There's something also about the line that makes them like very fun and easy to eat because you can just kind of like take off, you know, piece by piece. And they're just so playful and fun. That's what I like about them. Okay, I'm gonna pick one to eat. I'm gonna pick this one. I like how that's kind of also like a one-hand cookie. So the glaze is set. It's a very good shortbread. Super tender. It has that kind of dissolving texture that meltaways are known for, and great lime flavor. The center of the cookie has retained a little bit of moisture, but it's cooked all the way through. Really good. The only thing you really need is that star tip. And remember, the dough has to be a kind of warm room temperature for it to be pipeable. So if you have any issues, just set it in a warm spot. That's kind of the only pitfall here. Other than that, so easy, so much fun to make, and so much fun to eat. And that's really kind of the best kind of recipe. We're gonna bring you some more cookies and everything else from the book. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Cut.
Works for me. Oh, tail slate.
There it is.
Now turn it upside down.
But I don't say action. Oh, you do it upside down? That's kind of, you gonna do it?